I'm Blake Leath. Welcome back to TGS, the Gratitude Series. We're in episode 5. We're talking about peace. In episode 4, we talked about vocational peace, experiencing peace vocationally in one's profession and calling and choosing and so forth. And today we're going to talk about relational peace, interpersonal relationships and the sort. I promised last time I would introduce you to some neat folks, and so I'll do that in this stretch here in just a moment. I want to segue from episode 4. I told you that I would tell you about a great uncle, Rufe Bynum, and he was kind of the first person that sort of imparted in me the need or the opportunity to be thinking about the future vocationally. And I remember being at his house. He lived in Midland, Texas, and we visited him for the summer. I was 12, and we were hanging out by the pool, and he was barbecuing and everything. And he said, what do you want to do when you grow up? What do you want to be? I thought, 18? I don't know. And he said, well, make sure that whatever you choose, you love it, because if you do, you'll never work another day in your life. So, we've all heard that maxim 1,000 times now, but it sort of made an impact. It got me thinking early about, what are the kinds of things that I enjoy, right? That might allow me to do something and feel good about the way that I'm spending my time, and not be drudgery or difficult or whatever, right? So that kind of tees up and reminds me of another gentleman that made a huge impact in my life named Lou Romero. And Lou is a really special person. If you want to kind of, in your mind's eye, imagine Lou, he is like if Yoda and an owl had a love child, that would be Lou. So he's got this very thoughtful countenance and these huge brown eyes that stare into your soul. And he says quippy, wonderful things that you remember forever. And Lou has always struck me as someone who has been, I've told him, kind of the still waters run deep guy, and super peaceful. He's incredibly peaceful. He's in his mid-70s now. And I've known him since 1992, so it's been a long while. Been a really great mentor and at times, a colleague. We had a chance to work together for a number of years. But I interviewed him in 2017 for my book Fireside, and I asked him a series of questions. And so I'm gonna share with you his response because it's incredible. It was really thoughtful, and I think it'll be a good setup for what I'm going to talk about next. So I think you'll enjoy this. So I asked him. I said, yeah, you've always struck me as the epitome of still waters run deep. And he says, I mostly reflect on my life as filled with a great degree of happiness, contentment, and peace. And that has given me courage and happiness and confidence to keep on trucking even when facing adversity. And I say, you mentioned inner peace. Where does yours come from, and have you ever felt it jeopardized? It's a bit long, but it's pretty cool. He says, when I was in my 20s, I felt like I was indestructible. That I could do anything, and I don't think I even thought too much about inner peace. As I got older, it became apparent that I was running into bigger, hairier complexities. I started recognizing that life brings with it moments of adversity and changes that are difficult, and you have to deal with them. I wasn't feeling very peaceful, so I started recognizing that happiness and contentment and inner peace are not something you can count on every day. You have to work for them and be aware of them. Oh, so he's older than I remember. He says, even today at 76, and this is 2017, if I'm not feeling like I'm experiencing a sense of peace, I think back to what got me off track, to pinpointing the source of my anxiety. Why am I feeling this way? What's going on? I find that the source is often something that's out of alignment with my core values, out of alignment with my core values. There's something that I'm not doing or that I'm neglecting. I can then work through it and solve it. And he concludes, this is powerful, I don't think one can succeed in our field in interacting with human beings without caring and loving people. I'll tell you that one of the things I'm the happiest about is the fact that I don't have any enemies. I honestly cannot think of one. Yeah, absolutely. I've had a couple of scrapes and run-ins along the way, but these were temporary and inevitable. And that is true. Where there are two people, there is the likelihood for conflict, right? We even have conflict with ourselves, right? We have inner conflict. I know that I should eat healthy and I should exercise and I should do and don't these other things. And, we don't succeed at doing that all the time, right? I also find, and this is just me, so this may not be anybody else, but I hate going to bed at the end of the day, and then I hate getting up in the morning. So the very same me that doesn't want to get in bed and fights it and resists it like a 5-year-old, a petulant child, is the very same me who in the morning wants to hit the snooze button about 4 times, right? So that's conflict with the very same self, just in a matter of a few hours, right? And we all go through that all the time. So I love what Lou talks about there about peace, because he is an incredibly thoughtful person relationally, and he is peaceful. And when I'm with him, I find my own temperature comes down. He has a really great relational thermostat in that regard. So I want to share an anecdote about somebody that I coached many years ago, probably 13 or 14 years ago now. And his wife at the time, they were, they didn't work at the same company, right? But she worked in a company that was really toxic. I remember that. It was very toxic. And so a lot of our coaching dialogues, his and mine, had to do with, him sort of venting and being emotional and trying to talk through his feelings and struggles about what she was going through in her workplace, right? So she had a really incredible, influential position. And he said, one of the things that I've always loved about my wife is how much she loves everybody else. And he said, I feel better today. And he kind of got emotional. And I said, yeah, you seem lighter. I mean, I know that you're emotional, but you seem lighter. And he said, yeah, she came to a tough conclusion last night. And I said, what is it? And he said, she concluded that she's fought long enough and hard enough for that company, for that business, for those employees. But now it's time for her to fight for us, her family. And he said that it was very difficult for her to come to that conclusion. And I think he was sort of astounded that she had. And then in hindsight, they both wondered what took so long, right? So I see that a lot of times. People that are particularly conscientious, they will just about die doing everything that they can to try to protect, and leap in front of bullets and so forth, Secret Service sort of behaviors. But I find you can only fall on your sword once. And so if you find yourself struggling with relational peace, in your vocation or at work, in your career, professionally, whatever the case is, just make sure that you haven't gotten, as Lou would say, your core values out of alignment. Because I would hate to think that you've got your family like secondary or tertiary to work, right? I think those are tough calls, right? But ultimately we definitely have to choose family, first and foremost over the things that might be happening in organizational life. I'm also a huge believer in what I would describe as relational rest at home, right? So a lot of times in work and in these professional relationships, we're not putting on a mask, right, or a facade or anything deceptive or manipulative, right? But it's not like we're wearing our fuzzy slippers, perhaps, hopefully, regardless of hybrid and where the realities are, to the office. And so there is a visage or a persona that is different, that has a different layer than what we experience, right, in our relationships with our family in the household. And so I find that a lot of times, it takes a bit of extra energy, especially for introverts, to put that visage out into the world for a sustained period of hours, for a sustained period of consecutive days, like a week. You need to be able to come home and decompress. And I find people that are in that fight or flight or freeze mode, distressful mode for too long, like a pressure cooker, too much heat, too much pressure, too much time, the lid's going to blow off. when that's their experience at work, and they're kind of, girding their loins every day, putting on their armor, and getting their sword and shield to go into battle at the workplace, the family suffers tremendously. And then there's a psychological trauma that's happening to that spouse that's going into that, that scenario, right? I coached a woman for a long time that, every Sunday night she would get ill, physically ill. She would be in the bathroom ill because of her nerves and the way that she felt about her employer. And I was continuing, on the one hand, to encourage her, and then also to admonish her, like, why are you doing this to yourself? You have choices in the world, and if that's going to be your experience, that you have so much conflict in that workplace, then I think you need to get out of there, right? But who pays the price, right? In that case, her husband paid the price, their children paid the price. She clearly paid a price. But in time, her hand was forced, and she wound up being let go. Well, so there's another scenario, right, of the company is going to care for you to a certain point. But I think we've seen, for sure, through the pandemic, so much volatility, right? And again, 47 million Americans deciding to move their toys to a different sandbox. And a lot of people are doing better, right, in those new realities. So I think relational peace, alignment with your core values, if you're sleepless at night, if you're struggling with your eating, with your exercise, with your patterns, the things that you normally are able to rely on, you might start to question, am I too on guard? I did a series of interviews a couple of years ago, right before the pandemic, about culture, and two organizations had merged, and someone that was in the the legacy company had a great phrase. He said, "The old guard is on guard." And sometimes in our families, the same thing happens, right? we get to a place where, all that defensive-ness that we have at work, we come in and, boy, at the dinner table, there's just tension, there's silence, people are easily triggered in our families, right? Because of the distress that might be going on at the workplace. So I think we just have to kind of keep work and family in perspective proportionally. And who will be there long term, right? And who are the people that we made, marital vows to and long term commitments? That's very different than the commitment that we have with an employer, however much we may love them. So, we've all heard that phrase, hurt people hurt people. And that's absolutely true. I heard a phrase the other day, and I'd heard it before and had not written it down. And when I heard it this recently, I wrote it down. I thought it was really powerful. If you never heal from what hurt you, then you'll continue to bleed on people who did not cut you. And there are a lot of people, we are traumatized in various ways for whatever reasons. And, there are people who take that damage into a lot of other relationships, right? So you could be trapped in some dysfunctional team or department or dynamic with a boss or a direct report or a colleague, whatever the case is, and they're lashing out at you because of their insecurity, right? So they're projecting things on you that have absolutely nothing to do with you and everything to do with them. And I would offer that we're probably not going to change that. No matter how sophisticated our people skills might be, we're not in the full-time role usually, unless that is our job, to be a therapist, counseling the employee all the time through all those changes. Sometimes it's the wrong selection for the job because that person is such a drama maker that it's difficult to get everybody else, all the other apples in the cart, feeling like they can be at rest relationally in the workplace so that they can focus, be in the zone, be high performers, and not distracted by all the all the train wrecks and so forth. So a fellow that I really respect, and I got to watch him in action last week, and I continue to be blown away every time I see him. And he's locally here, right? He's a good friend named Cody McCommas, and he shared a number of things. And one of the things he said was, anytime you get a card, like a nice card from somebody, that should prompt you to send a nice card to somebody else. And it made me also think, anytime someone, tries to harm you or traumatize you or take advantage of you at the workplace or do something toxic, whatever the case is, you absolutely need to, do what you can to, make choices so that you're not in that environment in the future. And then start to think about, how can I, though, not pass that on and pass that through just because I've got someone that's incredibly contentious in the workplace. I wonder if maybe people like they're spewing hate at me, and I find a way to redirect love. I mean, I feel like if we can continue to do that within wherever it's possible, right? It's not always possible to do those kinds of things, but if we can take the higher road, then we start to become a bit of a conscience inside an organization. I coached a fellow one time, and he was talking about a colleague of mine, and he said, I love it when, so-and-so comes. And I said, why is that? And he said, because it's like his conscience is projected into the organization, and we all sort of perk up, and we're better. We're better because of him. And I just thought that was incredible. That is incredible. And we've got people in our family, right? And they're setting that pitch pipe, like in third grade music, before everybody plays the piccolo or whatever, the recorder. We all get dialed into the right frequency. So as leaders, we're setting a tone. And I'm a big believer that leadership is not always what we do, but often what we tolerate. I think it's really helpful to surround oneself with people that are encouraging. And of course, if you work in an incredibly discouraging workplace, one has to wonder, at what cost? Is it worth it? I interviewed a fellow earlier this morning, and I said, how you doing? He said, it's kind of a lousy day. There's this jerk. And, I hear that probably every day, for sure, 4 days a week. And, there's always a jerk. I have a late friend, a professor at Ole Miss, named Doug McQueen, and he wrote a book called Boss Holes. And I love that. There are absolutely boss holes in the workplace, and they're discouraging, and they're going to set a tone that is toxic for most everybody because they're insecure, they've got a power trip, a control problem, whatever it is, and it just becomes a zero multiplier times everybody else's goodness. It's always going to be 0 or less than 100 for sure, right? So when I think about encouragers, right? So Sylvia LaVoie, I mentioned her earlier, and Susan Thoma, and Mary Ober, and just a whole lot of folks. But I'm just really fortunate to have just incredible people in and around me and in my life, and that's because I'm choosing, right, to surround myself with those people. But I want to read. These are not like verbatim, but the kinds of things that they've sent me, and that other people have sent that are just really encouraging. And so this is like setting the bar. This is really setting the bar high. But I want to share it because it's crazy. It's like incredibly powerful that there are people out there in the world that do these things, that send such nice words of affirmation, right? So, an individual sends a note, say, hey, just checking in on you too. This is a note to me and my wife. Hope and pray that all is well and things are going well for you. Just wanted you to know that I'm thinking about you today and keeping you in my prayers. I just thought it was beautiful. And then another note from someone else, right? Hope you're doing okay. I know that you had a difficult ice storm. Yeah, that was, last year or the year before. I know that you've been hard. I'm praying for you, your family, and your neighbors. I love that. Yeah, here's another one. I just wanted you to know that I'll be thinking of you today. This is a different person. That any exhaustion would be renewed with energy, that your life's purpose would continually be refreshed, that you would feel joy today, no matter how tired you are, and thankful for all you've been given. May we not find ourselves discouraged, doubtful, daunted, or questioning our calling, no matter how fatigued we may feel at the end of the day. That we would manage our time well, that we might be of service to others in their time of need. Help us to prune what is hard to release, but which we know steals energy rather than gives it. May we continue to love life and have abundant energy to live it. God, isn't that crazy? That's so phenomenal. So my feeble equivalent of that, which kind of derives from a selfish place. I love movies. I love cinema. I love stories. in storytelling. And, the retention level for movies is crazy high, right? So we remember like 5 to 8% of a lecture and about 10% of reading, right? But we get into a movie and it's like 30% minimum. I mean, most of us, that can vaguely remember a movie can maybe remember a line or a scene or the people in it, and we saw it in high school or something. So I love movies because they're just they're inexpensive, and there's a lot of people there. So as an introvert, I enjoy being among people, but at the end of the day, I'm sort of empty, and so it allows me to like recharge in the presence of people because I don't want to be like totally alone all the time in a hotel room or whatever the case is. And it had that communal experience, right? So my equivalent, the closest thing I would have to that, probably, I do send cards every now and then, but that's just really disciplined right there. Is, and I mentioned him in episode 1, a nice old dear friend of mine, Dalton Jansen, who's so great with people, the zealous, passionate leader, all heart. And he told me, whenever we met, 1998, whatever year that was, that the sweetest sound a person can hear is their name. And of course, when he first said that, I was thinking, I don't know, I've been screamed at, so I don't know if that's exactly what I think of. But okay, I get it, Dalton. Yeah. And so I committed, and still do to this day, it's part of my thing. I ask people their name at the restaurant and at the movie theater and wherever I interact with people, the valet stand, whatever. And I make a mental note to try to remember it. And then I get on my phone as soon as I'm seated or whatever, dropped off at the table, and I add their name to a contact field for that business, right? And so I'll share here in a minute, but I've got 81 names of servers, as they describe themselves, at movie theaters since 2008, when I've been purposeful enough to write down their name. And then when I go back to those theaters, because when I do travel, I do go back to the same theaters. And then locally, I go to 5 theaters like crazy often, and call them by their name. So I make eye contact. I ask them how their day was. And now, wow, I show up and I really feel like Norm at Cheers. I don't deserve it, but that's how I get treated. Like, hey, Molly, or whatever. Cambria. It's a beautiful name, right? And so, bam, they just light up. I light up. We have a great visit. I love going there. And as much as I love movies, I'm not really there for the movies. I'm there for the experience of seeing these young people kind of light up, seeing them do their thing. They're just all precious, incredible people that are often college kids, trying to make ends meet and do these kinds of things. And I'm so moved by their spirit, right, and their customer service. And when we work with companies and they say, oh, we can't do customer service, I say, hey, man, I met a 20-year-old that could run circles around all your people because they choose to, right? They have this disposition, this heart of service. And if that's the case, anything's possible. So I think it's a tiny thing, but it can make a huge difference. Now, as we think about particularly sort of a locus of control or impact in the way that you might be able to go out and work relationally and make improvements with other people, I want to share what I've called sort of different times, right? A worry wheel, locus of control, in spheres of influence. Covey talked about something not dissimilar at all. And so as you look at these 3 rings, it's going to be moving from at the center, right, the things that I can control myself, which is going to be like 3 pronouns, me, myself, and I. And then we're going to move, okay, if I can't control it, maybe I can influence it. And then relationally, there are things that, hey, I don't control that. I don't influence it, but I can anticipate it. So let's look at each of those levels in some detail. In that inner circle, things that one can actually control, that will be my actions, my thoughts, my decisions, my choices, my priorities, those kinds of things. I do find that a common argument is, I'll see people kind of go at it around, I didn't want to feel anger, but someone made me angry. And so we get into sort of the microaggression and trigger, kind of a dialogue and so forth. So I don't have a strong opinion and come down on that one way or the other, because absolutely there are times that people, have this emotion that's the speed of light, through the limbic brain, the gator brain, that's a lot faster than sort of the rational brain, right? So the neocortex and so forth. So that's absolutely kind of a fight, flight, freeze reaction. But the way that we channel or shift that emotion, obviously, is within our control. We need to do that, particularly if it's going to jeopardize someone's safety because we're driving together or whatever the case is, right? So those control things are going to be the locus that have to do with us, and then that concentric ring around influence, that's going to be relationships with other people, everything from budgeting to team behavior. I mean, there are a lot of things that we do that creates ripples and all these relationships with other people, and that they do back toward us, that creates peace, or the absence of peace, some sort of relational disruption and so forth. Years ago, this is a long time ago, this is sort of before even Motorola StarTAC, much less BlackBerry, and I was traveling, I don't remember, Minneapolis, wherever I was, and I got stuck on a Sunday night in the airport, and so everybody's sort of, where it's fogged in, it's a weather deal. And so everybody's, bolting for the Delta, for the red coats, CSAs, the customer service agents, to get in line and negotiate whatever the outcome is for that evening, a hotel room at La Quinta, or, a sausage, or a pillow and a sleeping bag, whatever the case was. So I was, let's call it number 77 in line. And there's a fella in front of me, and he's so emotional, so angry by this whole fiasco. And it was, it was infuriating because it's so outside one's control and everybody's stuck, and so everybody's toast. But he was really belligerent, and I was thinking to myself, they're going to have to call like security over here. And finally, when he got up to the counter, I mean, he just... wow, he tore into the gal on the other side of that counter, and was using profanities, and there was a lot of hate speech. And she was cool, calm, collected, and she said, "Sir, there are two people who care about your predicament, and one that can change it, and that person is quickly losing interest." And I love that. It took a while, right? Because his gator brain was so amped up. It took a while for him to process what she said, and be logical again. But once it clicked, click, whir, he chose an entirely different set of software behaviorally. And it was pretty sort of amusing to watch, but it was really a great object lesson in how that can be done, or how that is possible. So one thing that's helpful to keep in mind as we look at these rings, there's this phenomenon called target fixation, which is when I stare at something or fixate on something, I drift toward that, right? So if you imagine sort of, a long drive through Arizona or Kansas or wherever you may find yourself, and it's nothing but, a mesa or cornfield, you can get sort of hypnotized. And, if your attention drifts off the side of the road, your car may as well, your vehicle may as well, right? So, they say, keep your chin up. Otherwise, you look down and that's where you go. Or whatever you focus on is where you go as well. So if you're looking at the rings, I find sometimes people, their natural inclination is to be a blamer. And so at every level, they're finding a way to, sort of be Teflon around assuming any level of responsibility. I've got a really good friend that's really just a really neat West Point guy. And he says, it's pretty inculcated at the academy that, how does he say it? That we accept criticism, but we reject praise, or deflect praise. I think it's really powerful philosophy. I wish more of us did that or were able to do that. But the folks that are blamers, they're always looking out the window at someone else that could be responsible for their problem. So, man, if they would get their act together, or if they would give me more of a budget, or if I had more people, or I had more time, money, and people being the holy trinity in organizational life. There's never enough of those things. They're paramount for everybody. But this is one of the few occasions where I suggest it's good to be vain. So instead of looking out the window and blaming everybody and finding excuses for the woe is me, Chicken Little reality you've got going on, look in the mirror and ask yourself, Blake, what's your role in all this? And how can you show up better tomorrow? Because ultimately that's all I can control, right? So when we get to the anticipate ring, it's death, taxes, and delays, that kind of stuff. I do find, though, when we talk about relational peace, that some of the least peaceful people are the people who live in the past or the people who live in the future. And this was a huge thing just, relationally. And my wife's and my marriage, when I used to travel a lot and was kind of a machine and would Sunday afternoon right after lunch, I'd be packing and we'd be going to the airport, and then I had that routine. I would come in on Thursday night or Friday night, and it'd just be, task oriented, right? And so, had to find a way to do the reentry better and all those other kinds of things. But I remember one time, sort of having a skirmish with her at the island after a long trip, and I was worn out. And, it had been a long week for me just in general, and for her too. So neither one of us were at our best, but we kind of got into this skirmish. And I remember she said something about, I don't know, you'll be happy because I don't feel like you live in the present. And that was true, because I was always recovering from what had just happened and then sort of worrying about what I had to do next. And that was very convicting because she was spot on. I still struggle with, as I described earlier, the is bridge, kind of living in the now. And so in relationships, it's very hard to be in a relationship with someone who is not there, present, now. Because the people that live in the past, the people who live lives of regret, coulda, woulda, shoulda, all over themselves, all that stuff. It's like they're in their mind, it's always Bruce Springsteen's Glory Days playing over the loudspeaker, and they're in high school 30 years ago, and that was the best time of their life, right? It was all downhill from there until now and then forever. So that's a difficult person to be in a relationship with in any significant way, right? And then the folks that are the worriers, they're living in a place that they don't control. So the best definition that I've heard of worry, and we've all heard 30 of them, but the best one that I've heard that I love is from David Mamet, just incredible, right? The playwright, author. And The Spanish Prisoner, wrote the screenplay for The Spanish Prisoner. And in that movie, there's a character that says, worry is interest paid in advance on a debt that never exists. And I love that. A lot of us could learn to live more in the now and not worry about the future. The future is what the future is. And so all we can do is what we can control, how I'm going to interact with it when it happens, the things with my locus of control that I can to prepare me for that future, whatever it may be, influence the things I can't control, anticipate the death, taxes, and delays, and enjoy the here and now, because that's all that I've really got, and I can't even be assured that I'm going to have that from one minute to the next, right? So I think living in the now is hard for a lot of us. A lot of people struggle with with always going back, right? I'm a historian, and I'm always, the company was great until we got bought, or the company was great until you came along, or the company was great, whatever. That's just revisionist history. Nothing was perfect. Nothing will be perfect. We are all imperfect and live in an imperfect world, right? So I do find that a lot of times people busy themselves. They don't experience that relational rest. And I love this notion of, you could be busy, but why are you busy? Is it constructive? Are you doing something productive with your time? Are you moving the needle in a positive way? The bee is praised, the mosquito is swatted. So make sure that your busybodying is a productive, constructive thing, that you wouldn't mind being published on the front page of the paper, right? So I will share a number of books in the description below today's episode, but I want to conclude this particular section with just a really neat a reading selection here from Tom Steding, whose book Real Teams Win is just a really incredible book. And this is something that he published in LinkedIn just a couple of weeks ago, and I really love it. And so as we think about that, the worry wheel, the locus of control, spheres of influence, and so forth, we've all been through this really tricky better part of 3 years through hybrid and distance and virtual and Zooming and all that. And so let me just read what Tom writes here in his post. He says, in a recent discussion with a close friend, Nick Copping, founder and CEO of Zoom Marketing, we discussed how the Zoom meeting environment may suppress collaboration due to the lack of physical presence in the meeting. Our sense was that there were certain subtle and elusive factors in the air. And then he quotes a gentleman named Mattias Desmet, professor of clinical psychology in the Department of Psychology and Educational Sciences at Ghent University in Belgium, who is a practicing psychoanalytic psychotherapist, who says, quote, when people talk to one another, they sense each other very sharply because they perceive the slightest change in intonation, voice timbre, facial expression, body position, rate of speech, and so on. They are connected with one another through a psychic membrane that transfers the slightest ripple in body and soul. Okay, I think I believe him, but it's on the edge, right? The human body, though, and I love this, the human body is, in the most literal sense, a stringed instrument. The muscles that span the skeleton and the body's other fibers are put on in a certain tension in early childhood. This tension for each individual determines which social phenomenon and to what extent those things will resonate for an individual. It determines the frequencies to which that person will be sensitive later in life. That's why certain people in certain events can literally strike a chord. They touch the body, if you will, and as such touch the soul. It is for this reason that the voice can make the body ill or conversely heal it. Wow. That's powerful, because that is what is in the air when we think about relational peace in the visage and at rest and in the now. That is all of it together all at once. And there are people with whom and in whose presence and around whom we feel at peace and at rest. I love that. Hey, I hope that you have enjoyed meeting Sylvia and Susan and Mary and Lou and Steve Buckles and Cody and Tom and Nick from Zoom Marketing and Mattias, and that they've been as encouraging to you as they have been to me. I'm going to leave you with a Mark Twain quote, so do hang around for that. And remember, if you're only great, you're barely halfway there, because if we're fortunate, grateful is where we'll arrive at the end. I'll see you on the road.